that she's okay to put the money up, but she doesn't know much about the condition of the house yet, and she wants to be satisfied with that. She's not concerned about her ability to get a loan, or she's paying cash, or whatever the deal is, but she wants that inspection component out of the way. So that's the one you can use. And then other allows you to be creative with it. So let's say that she's gonna get a loan, and so what she wants to build in there is that she'll do it within 3 days of pre-qualification for a loan and satisfaction, or it's usually not the loan, it's the appraisal. She's going to know if she can do the loan, or she doesn't need to go this way to begin with. So it may be just the appraisal and the inspection. And so we write in there that this non-refundable deposit will be given to the seller within 3 days of an acceptable appraisal and an acceptable home inspection. So that gets those two pieces of the unknown out of the way. And once she knows about those two things, she's comfortable going ahead and doing the deposit.
Can you check 2 of those boxes?
No.
Number 2 and number 3?
No.
You have
if you're going to put them together, just go to number 3 and put them together. And in fact, I think the form simplicity will let you check them all. So just spell it out. But again, let me emphasize, hardly ever will you use this. It would take a unique situation on the part of the buyer to do that. And if the buyer didn't offer it, the seller would come back and ask for it because of that unique situation. All right, conveyance. We're going to break here in 5 minutes and go to lunch. It just says that unless otherwise specified, conveyance of the property shall be made to the buyer by general warranty deed, fee simple, absolute, except it shall be subject to recorded instruments, easements, if any. See the bold, all cap. Such conveyance shall include all mineral rights owned by the seller concerning and located on the property, if any, unless otherwise specified. Most property owners don't know if they own the mineral rights. That sort of record keeping in the state of Arkansas is so screwed up, most attorneys don't know. They can't even research it in a lot of cases and be able to tell you. But in some cases, property owners know it's conveyed down through the family. For example, it's never been sold off, never been leased off, and so they know they own the mineral rights. It can be a little maddening when you get into a situation where you got a seller on 5 acres that wants to retain mineral rights. And the question is why? What's the point? About the only thing, especially up here in this part of Arkansas, is low pressure gas wells. Other than that, no one's discovered gold, no uranium.
Good.
Actually, North Carolina had a deal I think it went through the legislature as far as mineral rights, because they had a property on a large tract of land that retained mineral rights when they sold it, and they came back and claimed that native stone that laid on the surface was part of that mineral rights. And so they were coming in, loading it out, and selling it. Because they said, hey, and that's part of retaining mineral rights. You have the ability for ingress and egress to obtain that mineral. So, shudder if you run into it, but most of the time they don't know if they own it. If they do know they own it, they sometimes want to hang on to it, or they want half the mineral rights. But this is a good phrase that's in here that if they don't exclude it, it conveys if they own it at all.
Question.
Yes.
Since you mentioned mineral rights to
Good and loud, or they all here.
just the timber, lumber, is that included in mineral rights?
Do what?
Timber, lumber, like you're going to sell that to
Timber rights would need to be specified separately. if you're gonna entertain, timber rights. And again, that becomes a difficult property to sell too. Best thing to do. Here's the game they play with that. They won't go in and clear cut it because what's it look like after you? Any of you been in areas where they clear cut? It's ugly. It's shabby. So it's hard to sell. So they want to market it with that timber standing straight and tall and retain timber rights off of it. And most people don't want to buy it because they're uncertain as to what it's going to look like and how much of a clear cut they'll do when they do go into it. But that's more South Arkansas. Is that where you're from?
Family, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's your connection to that pine timber in South Arkansas. We don't see that much up here because it's hardwood. You see it some, and hardwood's becoming more and more valuable, especially certain types. Let's break a minute early. I hope it's slowed down on the rain, but title requirements, right? So you should be on page 5. And so those are your options. And this says buyer and seller understand the listing and selling firms are not licensed title insurance agents. And we got into that in part of the regulation, or we will. We did get into it because it was actually the court cases from the Supreme Court. You're not allowed to give legal advice as to the legality of the title that they receive. That's not your job. Title company will do that. So that's why how to take title will vary from one situation to another, and the title insurance company will visit with them about that. Or you need to tell them that if I've got a buyer that has a unique situation and they want to take title in some form different than what we normally do or what would normally be done by a title company, then they need to visit with a title agent and they can explain to them. But beyond that, they're not going to make a recommendation to them because, let's face it, neither us nor the title company know the financial situation of that particular family or couple or what individual. And so their accountant or their attorney needs to advise them about how to take title. They could be a subchapter S, they could be an LLC, they could want title with right of survivorship or not. Those kind of things, they need to visit with someone and get proper counsel if it affects something downstream that is pertinent to the financial situation. So, A says sellers shall furnish at seller's cost a complete abstract. We already had this discussion, right? No such thing. We don't use abstracts anymore. People have them. They can pass them on as a closing gift. B, sellers shall furnish at seller's cost an owner's policy. B is what you always use if you're going to do cash. If it's a cash transaction, there's not going to be a mortgagee's policy because the buyer's not going to get a mortgage. So it's only an owner's policy, and the seller will pay for the owner's policy. Now that line or that paragraph goes on to say that if a loan is secured for the purchase of the property, buyer agrees to pay the mortgagee's portion. Rather than fool with that, move on to the other paragraph, which addresses it more clearly. And C says, provided that the buyer and seller choose to close at the same title company, buyer and seller shall equally split the cost of a combination policy. Now the problem with that is that unless you go to D and say buyer and seller agreed to close at Waco Title, there's no way that you know at the time that you're writing this for the buyer whether the seller will close at the same title company, right? They could have some relative that works at some obscure title company and they want to close there. So not knowing, if you write it in and the seller signs it, now you're both going to close at that title company. So, do what? No, I would just use D. I don't like C because C says if they're going to. Well, how in the world do we know if they're going to? At the point that I'm addressing this contract, I don't know anything about the seller. what they're willing to do. But if I write it in there and the seller signs it, now we have an agreement. We're agreeing that we're both going to close. So what I would do on D is just say, buyer and seller agree to close at Waco Title, and title fees will be split 50-50. If you want to make sure that's going to close at the same place. Other than that, if you check B, what they're going to do is they will take what is typically the owner's policy, and they'll do a combination policy. They'll figure the cost on a combination policy, subtract the owner's policy portion or expense out of that, and the balance will be charged to the buyer. And it doesn't come out 50-50. So, and the other thing, don't get caught up in this worrying about it if you're asking the seller to pay the buyer's closing costs. You still indicate that it's split out 50-50. Don't get into splitting hairs over that, especially if the seller is going to pay all the buyer's closing costs anyway. It'll get caught up and taken care of. All right? So, you know, they really need to do something to see, because it's just too open-ended to say, provided the buyer and seller choose to close. It needs to say, buyer and seller agree to close at, and it will be split 50-50.
Isn't that the industry?
Yes. Yeah, we have a risk reduction committee every year that changes a little bit. Some of those people stay on that committee all the time. And it's almost like that committee every year feels like they haven't done their job unless they change something about the contract. That, you know, good enough is good enough, right? So they're always tweaking with it, and it's one of the reasons. Now, I'll give you this heads up. If you have a suggestion about something in the contract that ought to be changed, you can submit that to Arkansas Realtors Association. It has to be signed. There's a form for it, one-page form, and you just write out, hey, I think we ought to look at changing this to this. But it has to be signed by your broker, and it has to be submitted by April 1st of every year, because that committee starts its work after that. So suggestions that trail on through the balance of the year just don't get addressed. But the reason that they now require that the broker sign it is because a lot of times, not necessarily newer people coming into this business, but people who just weren't involved, don't know that a particular issue may have come up umpteen times and been addressed, and they're submitting it again. I'm not sure that most brokers would know that either, but at least that's one other stopgap in the process that the broker has to sign off of, because maybe the broker knows why that can't be done or has seen that suggestion in the past and it never gets submitted. So you might see something that you think is a good idea to submit. Just get the form, make your suggestion, get your broker to sign it, same thing. Okay? Survey.
Oh, Phil,
Yep.
can you go back and talk real quickly about what if you're closing at a different time?
What about it?
You just put that in on D, that's where you and your client are going to close. Like my guys are going to Mercury and the seller's going to Waco.
But did you know ahead of time when you wrote the contract that the seller was going to go?
We had talked about it, but yeah, I did.
Yeah, then you just writing it?
Okay.
You know that. Most of the time you just don't know that.
Yeah.
You don't know where the other side's coming from. Okay, big smile.
I don't know if I'm getting everybody in here or not, but
Because you're the inaugural class. Right?
Look at me, I don't think you face this round.
Gwen wants to make sure she was accounted for.
You do panoramic?
It's okay, I'm
From Monday. No, you'll have to be still. Have you ever seen a panoramic where people moving around? Okay. Wait a minute. It is right to left, or left to right. Left to right, that's how here it is. And I'm gonna make sure I get you in there, Glenn. Don't hide behind anybody. People always look funny when they're doing that. Okay, let's see what it looks like. All right. It just looks like you're sitting in a V-shaped room. Okay. Survey. Here's the pat answer you always want to give a buyer. You get down to this point and I say, Emma, do you want a survey? And most of the time or often, Cama's going to say, do I need one? And so here's your answer. I would suggest this cheap insurance. To know where the boundaries are, where the structure sits in relationship to those boundaries, whether there are any easements or right-of-ways on this property that you would need to be aware of. So yes, it's in a subdivision, $450 to $500 is cheap insurance. To know that now rather than find that out later. I can give you all kinds of examples where people didn't do it and wish they did. High-end house here in Fayetteville a few years ago. The buyer said, no, the builder has already got the fences in. I know where the property lines are. I don't need a survey. They bought this particular house because it had a larger backyard because they wanted a pool. And so they contacted the pool company, and the pool company came out and pulled some other information and said, you know what, just recorded instruments show that there's a utility easement that runs cat-a-corner across the backyard of this house. No pool. Now, had they gotten a survey ahead of time, it would have located those easements on there. They would have known, and if they chose not to close, they could have done it at that point. But now they own it, and they can't put a pool in the backyard. So, yeah, you might see where the house is, you might see where the fence is. You don't even know if the fence is in the right place. If the fence is in the wrong place on a piece of property, let's just say in a subdivision, and it's over on the neighbor, and maybe the owner doesn't even know that. Maybe when they bought it, they didn't get a survey. They don't know it's over on the neighbor. And your buyer closes and moves in. When's the first sign that they know that it's over on the neighbor? When the neighbor knocks on their door and says, by the way, did they tell you that your fence is over on me by 3 feet? And I just wanted to visit with you about what you're going to do about it. Do you want that conversation? Do you want the buyer to have that conversation? No. And so I tell the buyer, better to know that right now. Because if you know now that it's over on the neighbor, you can insist that the seller rectify that problem before you close up. You don't want to move in and be at odds with a neighbor from day one. And so, yeah, get it done. A lot of times, too, we'll see situations where driveways are poured over on the neighbor. Can you fix that? It's tough to do. And sometimes that's the solution. You bust it out and report it. Situations where the house is built too close to the side setback line. And most of the time, the way that happens is that the overhang is encroaching on the side setback line. But a lot of subdivisions, the side setback is like 8 feet, 10 feet. And so maybe the house, the footprint of the house is 10 feet away from the side property line, but you got an 18-inch overhang and it encroaches. In those kind of situations, the city's not going to make a owner tear a house down over that or cut a overhang off, but they do require you jump through these silly hoops to get a variance. And I don't even understand the reason for it. Because they're always going to grant it. There's not an option. They're not going to make you redo the house. Now, if it was truly over on the adjoining property owner, now you got a problem. Now you're encroaching on the other property owner. It's a matter of trying to negotiate with that property owner to do a lot line adjustment so the lot line now goes, if it's even possible, over on that adjacent property owner. And so you're really buying more land off of that adjacent property owner to try to correct that flaw. Do all of those sound like things that you would rather avoid? Yeah. So get it done. Who pays for it? They'll ask you that question. And they'll say, well, shouldn't the seller pay for this? Well, if you're the buyer, the seller should, right? If you're the seller, the buyer should. Years ago when I first started, it was kind of this mindset that the seller was selling property and saying, here's where the property lines are. If you can't accept that, then you can go pay for a survey and satisfy yourself. But anymore, it's just negotiable. Sometimes the buyer will offer to pay for it. Sometimes they'll ask the seller to pay for it, or they'll split. Those are the options that are in the contract. So that's what it says. A new survey satisfactory to the buyer, certified to the buyer within 30 days prior to closing by a registered surveyor showing all improvements, easements, and encroachments paid for by the buyer, seller, or equally split. B says no survey, and C says other. And what you'll see often in other is the buyer understands that, Kama understands that Matt has a survey that was done 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and so she's simply asking for a copy of it. So, let me finish. So that's what you would write and see is the buyer requests a copy of any existing survey that the seller may have. Now know this, there is nothing in that survey when Matt gives it to Kama that Kama can hang her hat on. If it's wrong, it's wrong. It was certified to Matt, not certified to Matt and whoever he ever handed it to. Only certified to Matt. So she'll get it for information purposes, but no legal ramifications to it whatsoever. And the other thing to keep in mind, the survey that was done 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago is a snapshot in time of what that property looked like. It may not look like that today. I'll pick on Matt. Matt's graduating high school picture probably looks different than Matt does today, right?
A little bit.
It's a little bit.
Not as different as mine.
Yeah. So the same is true of a survey of a piece of property. The older it gets, the more time that has passed from the time that survey was done, the greater the likelihood that it no longer looks that way. Things get built, easements get signed, and utilities get put in, fences get put in, and so it may not look the same. So if it's frozen in time, yeah, but who can say that? Who would know that? The only way you'd really know that is to get another survey. Yes.
Question on
If
the,
I've talked long enough, sometimes I just answer the question.
on the,
Good and loud.
the 30 days on that, on A,
What
that
about it?
30 days starts from when the contract is start or when before.
No, it says 30 days prior to closing.
Prior to closing.
Yeah. So whatever your close date is, sometime in that 30 days prior to closing is when this survey needs to be done.
Be a day before closing.
It could be a day before closing. It could be 29 days before closing, sometime between 30 days and the close date. In other words, in Kama asking for a survey, she doesn't want one that's 6 months old or 2 months old. She wants one that is done in that last 30 days before closing. Unless you go down to C and change that. You know, if Matt just had one done 45 days ago, it doesn't fit that description, right? Because it's not done in the last 30 days before closing. But she may be okay with that. Go to C and just write it in. Seller to provide buyer with survey dated whatever the date was that the survey was done. It says, should buyer agree to accept the most recent survey provided by the seller? This survey is for information purposes only, and buyer will not be entitled to the legal benefits of a survey certified in the buyer's name. The only way she'll get that is if she orders one, regardless of who pays for it. Doesn't matter. Prorations, that's pretty self-explanatory. Anything that needs to be prorated as of the date of closing will be prorated as of the date of closing. Taxes, POA dues, things of that nature. Everyone understands taxes paid in arrears in Arkansas, right? So what you're paying in 2018 for property taxes is actually 2017 property taxes. Tax books open in February, they close in October. If you pay after that date in October, you pay penalty. And you can't pay them until the tax books open in February. I don't know why that's an antiquated system, because it used to be 100 years ago that's when we opened tax books and started recording them. That's really not how it's done, but still stick with that process. Fixtures and attached equipment. This can be a fun one. Here's kind of a default before we get into the discussion on it. You get to 13, and it says all this stuff that's enumerated in that paragraph will stay unless it's exempted otherwise. Trash compactors, range ovens, water heaters, exhaust fans, heating, air conditioning system, plumbing, septic, electrical. So you can see it's naming things there that in a lot of cases won't even be a part of the property. So it's throwing it all out there. But it goes on to say fireplace inserts, comma, and then you've got a little bit of space to write other things in. If I'm talking to Kama about it, I'm going to say, well, let me ask you, was there any other thing about the property that may have been out of the ordinary that you wanted to stay? That's probably not addressed here. I mean, there was a swing set in the backyard. You want that?
Of course, backyard.
Okay. Then I'm going to write it in there. You really don't need to address things that are obvious that they're attached. But if there is some question about whether it's attached or not, spell it out. Some of that sometimes would be like in a living room, there would be a shelf unit, and you don't really know whether it's attached to the wall or it's freestanding. Just ask Emmett, are we asking for it? And some of them are so much a part of the room that to take it out, and you can kind of tell sometimes if the baseboard runs up to the side of something and stops, then it's likely attached, but if it's not attached, it's certainly going to be an eyesore if you take it out because it was built in place. So when in doubt, write it in if the buyer wants it. I'd even ask about drapes. Now here's the thing, curtain rods and the attachment to the wall, that stays, it is attached. But people can take the curtains off and take it with them. It's a silly practice as far as I'm concerned. The likelihood that your next house, that you have the same number of windows and they're the same size as the one that you left is probably slim to none. However, if you put a few $1,000s into drapes, you might get to the other house and do the modification and make them good. But you're going to ask the buyer. What this says is window and door coverings. I'm not sure what window and door coverings mean. Do you? If windows throughout the house have mini blinds or 2-inch blinds and they have drapes, are both of those window coverings? Is one of them window covering? Can you see where if you're the seller, the interpretation is one way, if you're a buyer, it's something else? So write it in. If you write it in and the seller signs it, we have an agreement on what it was. But here's another way that I do that, because sometimes things are in the MLS, and this is how this scenario will play out. Matt has it listed for $250,000, and he's agreed to, in the MLS, to leave the hot tub and play set in the backyard. Okay. Kama makes him an offer. I'm not Kama's agent at this point, because I wouldn't do this silliness, but somebody's Kama's agent makes the offer and doesn't address that. Saw it in MLS and said, hey, it's in the MLS, seller says they're going to leave that, so good for you. You'll get a hot tub and swing set out of this. Makes the offer to Matt, at 230,000. And they negotiate back and forth and finally arrive at 240,000 as a contract price that they both agreed to. But still no mention of the placement. The only mention of it, that hot tub was in the MLS. So now we get to close, and Kama gets the keys, and she goes to the house and walks into the backyard, and what? Huh? No hot tub and no placement. And so Kama says, the seller said he was going to leave it. He put it in the MLS, right? So is the seller at fault? Is Matt at fault because he took it? Here's the deal. It's too much a gray area. Matt listed his property at $250,000 and said, "I'll leave the swing set and the hot tub." She didn't offer $250,000. She offered something less, and they negotiated on something less. So in Matt's mind, his thought process is, "Hey, at full price, I was going to leave it, but I didn't get full price, so I'm taking it." So here's the way to fix that. Say it. Just put it in there. I don't care if the MLS says it. You can't rely on what the MLS says. Write it in the contract. So if my discussion with Kama, she wants the hot tub and the swing set, I tell her it was in the MLS. Apparently he intends to leave it. Let's just write it in there and we'll make sure that it stays with the property. Then there's no doubt about it. So be sure and put it in there. And that's on anything like that. Just write it out. Because it's understandable that Matt's interpretation would be different than Ken's. And for justifiable reasons.
When it says gas and electric grills, which one might is your backyard grill or like when we indoor? Like
Well, the ones that become questionable are gas grills that are
attached to
500 pounds, well, not necessarily even built in, but they're huge gas grills and they're attached to a gas line. They're not propane.
Okay.
And so a lot of times that becomes a confusing thing too. So again, if you want it, ask for it. If the seller's going to leave it, you'll sign the contract. If he's not, he'll take it out. Just don't leave it up for grabs. But yeah, those outdoor kitchens, those can be kind of in place and difficult to move and would leave a mark if you did. Okay, pretty much clear on that. And then down at the bottom, it says buyers aware the following items are not owned by the seller or do not convey with property. And so that's rare. Decades ago, we would see this. Well, now on rural property, you'll see it with propane tanks because they're not owned by the seller, they're leased. In fact, you'll even get into this negotiation about the seller wanting compensation for the remaining gas in the propane tank. And trying to figure out how much that is. And you'll enjoy it when you get there. And then the other thing, years ago, were satellite dishes. Those big mesh things that were communicating with Mars. Those things were not, in the beginning, were not owned by the seller. They were leased. You contacted a satellite company and they'd come out and install it and set it all up and run the cable. But you were paying monthly lease on that and you didn't own it. I don't know. The last time I saw one of those, my kids were using a fiberglass one as a sled in the winter downhill. And it worked great. Next page, other contingencies. This is the one that primarily gets used for a house sale. Kama wants to make an offer on Matt's house, but she got to sell her house first. So she makes the offer. I'm representing Kama again because I'm going to do this the right way this time. And she's got to sell her house. And so we're going to write this up so that we protect Kama in the event that her house doesn't sell. Now, I'm going to suggest to you in this market as